Good morning, everybody. Welcome back to OrbitCon. This is our last day, Sunday. We are starting out with a panel on trends in secular groups put on by the Center for Inquiry. If you want to follow along today, if you want to ask us any questions, just go to the-orbit.net. There's a banner ad up at the top of pretty much every page for OrbitCon. Click on that. That'll take you to the schedule. And then that will take you, you can click on the link for this particular panel. Leave any questions in the Q&A there. And without further ado, I will turn this over to Debbie Goddard.
Hello. So we have a lot of panelists. I won't give a long introduction, but very briefly, my name's Debbie. I'm glad to be participating in this, and I think this is an important topic. I've been working in the secular movement now for 12 years, and I've seen a lot of changes in that time. Before that, I volunteered for 6 years. So I've been involved in some way or other, mostly at the grassroots level or working with grassroots leaders for 18 years. And there have been a lot of changes, with some of them happening before the New Atheism started, some of them happening after New Atheism started, some of them in the last couple of years. So here we have a panel of experienced group leaders to talk about what they've been seeing at the local group level, what they've seen over time, and what we expect to see in the future and how our groups can adjust to stay relevant and informed. So with that, I'd like to start with some introductions to get the panelists to introduce each other. Let's start with Stef.
Hello, my name is Stef McGraw. I'm a campus and community organizer for the Center for Inquiry. I've been at CFI for 3.5 years, but before that, I was part of a group called the University of Northern Iowa Freethinkers and Inquirers as a student, and I was in various leadership positions for that. And then starting this January, I also became a CFI branch leader for our local branch, CFI Western New York. So I have some perspective on student organizing and community group organizing, and then through my role at CFI's headquarters, just been able to have sort of a broad overview of some of the trends going on. Excited to talk about that on this panel.
Cool. And next, Jen.
Hi, my name's Jennifer Beahan. I'm the Executive Director of Center for Inquiry Michigan. I was a volunteer at our group for a number of years before being hired in 2007 as a half-time person, as an assistant director to then Director Jeff Sieber, who founded the group in 1997. And so we just had our 20th anniversary, and in January I took over as the Executive Director. And in my time here, we expanded from 2 lectures a month and periodic socials to we now have discussion groups and regular events in 8 cities throughout Michigan. And we have about 20 events, between 15 and 20 events a month, depending on how active our social activities are. And we also work to do some state level advocacy as well. And so coming in as a fresh out of college student with a music degree, I now run a nonprofit. So I've gotten a lot of experience from the grassroots up, especially my interests include volunteer management and best practices for nonprofit as far as systems and running organizations.
Cool. And Monette?
I don't know, that's hard to follow. I don't have the creds that Jen has. I started getting involved in the secular movement online, really, in about 2011. And then this was when a lot of crises were happening as far as women in the movement were going. And then I saw that Center for Inquiry was hosting Women in Secularism, a conference all about women. And that was huge. Nobody else was doing that. And I'm like, I have to check this out. And then I saw that they had a chapter that met a block from my house. So I said, I have to take this over. So within a couple of months, I was the VP of programming for the Akron part of the chapter. And then about 6 months earlier than my goal, I was president. And about that same time, I had also joined Secular Woman because it had popped up in 2012, just shortly after Women in Secularism. And then by November of 2012, I was on the board of that as well. So I have grassroots level working with our local chapter, planning events, doing all of the things on a volunteer basis, and then on the national level of running a nonprofit organization that has a mission of amplifying the voices of women. So it's in there that I'm on this panel.
Cool. And Michael?
Yes, good morning. I'm Michael Clough. I'm the president of the South Jersey Humanists, an AHA chapter based near Atlantic City, New Jersey. We've been around, I should have checked exactly how many years we've been around, but I think it's about 10 years. And we're a small group. It's a pretty, semi-rural area, so we don't have a huge membership, but we've been along since at least the Reason Rally and since then. But we've also been involved in CFIs. I think it was called the Free Thought Books Project, the books project with pen pals, people in prisons. Yeah, so we've done various things. We have one meeting a month. We have a Drinking Skeptically event, and as many speakers as we can get into our area.
Have you been involved since the founding of the group?
Yes. We didn't really have elected positions until I think about 5 years ago.
It must have started it did start after I moved to Buffalo, because I remember I tried to join all of the groups in my region, and that wasn't there yet. All right, we may be joined by one other panelist if her tech can work out. Debbie Williams from the Humanists of Houston. If she joins in, she should just be able to plug right in. So, let's start by talking about some trends we've seen in our groups before the last couple of years. Several of you have been involved for 10 years plus, which leads to a lot of perspective. So let's talk about that. What generally have you seen before the Trump election happening in your group? I think there's been a lot of change after the 2016 election, or even leading up to the 2016 election. So before we get to that, let's go back and look at what things look like before that. Maybe starting with Jen, because you've been in a leadership position for 10 years.
So I would say one of the biggest things that we have seen here in Michigan was when I joined, this was pre-social media. So this was about 2001 when I really started getting involved more, was that I was one of two females, and the other one could have been my grandmother in our group, the first couple meetings that we went to. And the organization was very aware of the fact that they needed to increase their diversity. And so when my husband and I started coming regularly, they were incredibly happy to have us there because we were under 40, and I was happy to help organize things. So we actively were trying to reach out to campus groups even back then and try to get younger kids involved and get them to start attending meetings so that we didn't just have a bunch of old white guys sitting around in a room. And I'd say we have had some success with that. I think, honestly, though, the biggest switch was when Facebook came on the scene, the social media, MySpace, and Meetup has played an important role as well, but more so with bringing in a diversity of ages and genders specifically. We have been able to use the Facebook platform to make sure that people knew we were here, because before that you had to go and find the website, which in 2001, a lot of smaller groups didn't even have websites. We luckily, our founder runs a marketing firm, so we had a website, and so people were able to find us that way. But a lot of the ways that we promote our groups has had to change, and there are some benefits, but also a lot of drawbacks with having to promote your events on several different platforms. So that's one of the biggest things, has been the media aspect. How we reach out to people and how people find us has been one of the biggest shifts that I've seen. Because there definitely was, right when the New Atheists came out in the early 2000s, there was definitely a lot of people that were looking and trying to find people for the first time. And we did see a huge increase in attendance in the like 2003 to 2010 range. Was actually the peak of our attendance. And then after that, it kind of fell off again, because I think as people connected more on social media and videos and things online became more available, they felt less need to go to a room to be in the same room with somebody, because they already knew they weren't by themselves. Whereas before we would get the, "I'm so happy I'm not alone, I thought I was the only one" comments from people when they would walk into events the first time. So.
Yeah. Michael, since you also go back about 10 years, would you like to add your perspective to that?
Absolutely, yes, thank you. Yeah, like Jennifer, we saw an influx after the Reason Rally. The Reason Rally was probably our first event where a bunch of us together as South Jersey Humanists went to attend, and we went there bright and early in the morning and stayed all day. So we did see kind of an influx, and we started almost, you would almost call it like a Four Horsemen fan club at first. And you know, since then, over the years, we've kind of developed more of a desire or focus toward doing, you know, support work, working at the food bank. We had a speaker about human trafficking recently, things like that. So people, even before the Trump election, were starting to get more interested in the kind of good without God side of things than sitting around and talking about what Sam Harris said the weekend before. But our membership primarily came through Meetup, and still is the biggest source of membership. And then Facebook, of course, became a big factor, as Jennifer said earlier. And again, you know, one of the things to follow on with that, one of the funny things about that is about having all these different platforms, Twitter, et cetera, is the challenges for graphic design. You want to have a nice banner, but you don't want to design one for each social platform. So the big challenge is, where do you focus your energies on in terms of making it look good, and do you try to get every event to look right in every social platform is a new challenge that I don't think most people would think of with a group.
Oh, that is a huge challenge that it frustrated me every day.
Yeah.
How about Stef? Would you like to go next?
Sure. So I honestly will probably have to speak a little more to student groups, just because that's where I've spent more of my time overall, and particularly before Trump's election. But when I joined the movement in 2009, what I saw with my group was something that seemed very similar to other student and community groups that I met throughout like the country at conferences and stuff, which is definitely like new atheism was the thing, and everything that kind of comes with that. By the time I graduated college in 2014, it definitely shifted, where more of our members were interested in humanism and skepticism and volunteering and interfaith and putting on like a good face of atheism. But something that I sort of had to figure out as a group leader is how to balance that with the fact that when new people join groups, a lot of them really are looking for sort of like, even if it's not necessarily a new atheist thing, they are looking to like talk about why God doesn't exist and just like talk about religion all the time. And something that I've sort of had to figure out, both as like a student leader and now as a community group leader, is how to balance the people who have been in groups for a long time and are sort of like, okay, I'm over it. Like, we don't have to talk about why God doesn't exist. Like, let's do something good with our values. And the people who have been very, you know, they feel like they've been really harmed by religion, and so they need to come in and have a safe space to just like talk all this crap about religion and talk about why believing in God is stupid, and that's like very therapeutic for them. So that's sort of the type of shift that I've seen, and I don't know how that maps onto just like trends in general, but that's sort of what I've seen in my experience.
Monette?
Well, I wasn't around during the W years, but my understanding of the history of our chapter, which is 22 years old, is that there was a big boom during the W years. So and then leading up to Reason Rally, I was actually one of the booms of the Reason Rally. Like I mentioned earlier, that's when I came in. And we've seen a significant decline since then, some ups and downs with sizes of groups. And we have this interesting split right now where some of our, I'll say, original members only get our newsletter and are not online at all. And then we have these people coming in strictly from Meetup and trying to get the information out to everybody is a complete challenge. Because how do you tell people who only get your mailed newsletter that something has been canceled or changed? So that definitely presents an issue. We have seen a definite youngening of our demographics. We do get the really interesting part is when we get a single young female who shows up because we have an interesting thing, and then trying to get them sort of involved in the space before they're chased out by all the same voices talking over everybody all the time, which is something that I've really been working on for the last couple of years, but still presents as a really huge challenge just because they insist on it and it takes so much energy. So yeah, right now we're kind of at a shrink of our membership. The past year and a half, I've been not having the amount of energy that I would like to have to run this group. And so we're not expanding at all. We have open members, open positions on our board. And without having a marketer, then we definitely don't do outreach. And that's a significant issue that we're running into right now.
So you talked about your group youngening, young women showing up, things like that. Have more people did join after New Atheism, you all said, or after some books started being published and social media started existing. What other demographic changes might you have seen in your groups over the last 10 years? Like, people have been attending meetings. Do they stay around?
Are you asking me specifically?
Anyone who wants to grab it. I can point to someone and pick if you like, but since you're up, why don't you go?
Okay. We'll have a few. We'll have, someone new come in and stick around for a while, which is good. We've gotten some new members recently, mostly through our discussion group, I think, because that's a very well-controlled, moderated discussion and everybody gets to talk. And if you're brought in an environment like that, then it's easier, I think, to stay. But the women, no, not the younger ones. They, will come to maybe one, maybe two meetings, and then we won't see them for months. Maybe they'll come to something if we do a charity event, but we don't see them a lot at the more formal presentations that we hold once a month, or even well, maybe occasionally they'll show up at the socials. But yeah, it's really hard, and that is an age group really that everybody tries to get and hold, that post-college up until the family is established is kind of a real tough group to get. But yeah.
Debbie, some of the things, to echo what Monette has said, is very similar. So I've actually been trying to hypothesize about this because I try to, part of my job is understanding the hows and the whys. And so, or my interests rather, not my job. And so I puzzle over these things a lot. And yeah, we do have some of the similar problems that Monette said with people, certain members that I'm sure everybody watching this or listening can just immediately picture about 3 to 10 people in their head, of the overtalker, the annoying one, the one who just has their pet project and they won't shut up about their particular quadratic physics equation, something, and you're like, I don't even know what you're talking about, people. And so, yeah, it is definitely that getting people to stay has been a puzzle that I have been thinking on for years. But one of the things that I have noticed, especially with the differing trends of what Stef kind of hit on at the beginning of the people needing to be in a room with people who felt like them and thought like them is becoming less of a need because people feel more connected. But one of the things that I have observed over the years, almost like a stages of grief, when you get people who are coming out of religion, first they need to know they're not alone. Then they're angry and they want to argue with everybody. And then once they get past that and they realize, oh, I'm not the only one, I got that out of my system, then they don't necessarily come because they feel obligated like we would be used to seeing in religion or even in some political activism things. And so there's not that guilt factor there. And so then they only come when they're particularly interested in that particular topic or that particular lecture. And so we see a lot of flux with which people come to which things. And I could list off for you certain people who will only show up if we have a political lecture, or some who will only show up when we have that biology lecture. And so keeping a variety of topics provides its own challenge because everybody wants their own thing. And so one of the things that we've been trying to do more recently is do more discussion groups, like Monette said, where the event hosts and the attendees at that event have the power to select whatever topic they want every month. And then on the lecture side, they're more formal events. I try to cycle through philosophy, science, humanities, or political, more like social media or like the topics we see more on social media, like current events and news and things like that, to try and keep all of those people in the circle, even if they don't come to every single event. Since the between like the Reason Rally and I Say Trump, we definitely had, like Monette was saying, there's a lot more variety of ages coming in, but they don't stick because I think that there was just so many things going on as far as activism, and especially since the Trump election, is people wanting to really focusing all of their time on activism issues, where they don't really feel like coming in and listening to a science lecture. But when we have one that's on secular advocacy, then they show up all of a sudden. So there's definitely the interests are kind of switching. And then also too, that nebulous young women group. So what we've been trying to do is we have noticed that our service events that we do, social service, we have a lot more females that come to those. And then also we have been trying to work with some of the families in our groups that we've identified to start doing family-based activities, so that when those ladies have their first couple kids in that first like 0 to 4 age, where they kind of just disappear completely because they're consumed by taking care of the baby, that there are some events where they can just bring the baby and not have to feel bad about like it making noise in a lecture or anything like that. So we're, we've had mixed success on all fronts, I'd say.
Yeah, Michael or Stef, would you like to address this?
What was the question again? I have a few thoughts, but I don't remember the original question.
Demographic shifts, maybe, was it? Were we talking about demographics more generally? If those have changed, do people stick?
Yeah, so, for the amount of time I've done like community group organizing, I don't think I have enough to say about like demographics, although I feel like recently we have been getting some younger people, and I do wonder if some of that is us turning some more of our efforts towards activism and going to like marches and things and engaging in current events more and trying to be more responsive to what's going on, having lectures about like fake news and things like that, where people who might not have plugged in before might be interested now because they see it as more relevant to what's going on politically. But yeah, I have found it hard to keep younger people coming back to our CFI Western New York events. Like kind of when I inherited the group, it was older. And so those are the core members, the people who've been coming to our events for 20 years are, they started out old and now they're getting older. And one of the best ways that I've found to keep younger people coming back, although it's still something that I'm working on, is to give them a sense of ownership of the group. So, if someone comes in and they seem kind of interested, but they seem to not really like know exactly who to talk to, where to plug in, like see if they want to like start running some of our discussion events or help out with social media, like give them some chance to take ownership of the group so they feel like it's something they're invested in And from there, hopefully we can build sort of like a critical mass of younger people, so younger people don't feel like the odd ones out. But it's hard to keep younger people coming back to a group that is filled with older people. That's the honest truth.
Michael?
It's funny too. Our demographically, I could say that we're fairly well represented in terms of gender, but other demographics we haven't done as well about. But I think what may be our biggest problem with maintaining, bringing younger people into the group is that we meet on Saturday mornings, which is probably the kiss of death. And so I'm trying to figure out, do we need to move our meetings, or when should that be? Because there's a college right across the street from where we meet, and there is a humanist atheist group based in that campus. And so we're trying to do things together with them and maybe have joint meetings during the semester.
Yeah. Saturday morning.
Yeah, I know. It actually came to a vote that people in the, that's how it came to be, is that was the best time for the most people. But I'm starting to think we need to rethink that.
Yeah, when I was first getting involved in everything, when I was 20, 21, 22 years old, many moons ago, I was so excited about this movement, these communities, that I joined 10 different groups within 100 miles of me. And only one of them did I not keep attending, and it was the one that met on Sunday mornings. I was just like, forget that. I'd rather go to the one that meets on Thursday and everyone goes out to a pub afterwards, and I'll drive 80 miles to do that. But the one that was, 10 minutes from me that met on Sundays at 10 or 10:30, I did not stick with. And that was one of the couple of humanist groups too, which tended to be an older crowd. It didn't meet my interest. People would fall asleep during meetings all the time and just kind of, walk out after it was over. And I was like, why am I waking up early for these dry discussions and no sense of community or participation? So I see that. I see that still. I experience that. And even now, we have a meeting here at CFI Western New York that takes place on Sunday. I have not attended.
Well, I know the first thing on my to-do list when this is over.
Yeah, and Saturday seems like an even rougher, like Saturday morning, man. I don't know.
One thing that I would say that we have done in order to combat that exact problem is, so we live in a very religious area. West Michigan, they jokingly refer to it as the Bible Bra. So it's like the Bible Belt of the North. And we are the home of 4 religious colleges and Zondervan Publishing. So, and the home of the Christian Reformed Church. So we have a lot of people directly here in West Michigan that definitely have that need for that social connection, whereas even people in the other parts of the state don't have that same drive to have to be in the same room with somebody who's like them. And so one of the ways that we have combated the problem that you guys were just talking about is to have a Wednesday night meeting, because Wednesday nights are church nights. And so anybody who's not going to church doesn't have anything on those nights. There's no sports clubs. There's no, concerts for kids and things, because nobody schedules them. But what do you have people that have to work second shift? So we had years ago, people suggest we have a discussion group. So we do have a discussion group on Sunday mornings, but they chose to do that. And then every time anybody complains why I don't go, I said, that's why I left the church, was so I could sleep in. You're the one who chose to have this meeting at 10 o'clock on a Sunday morning. And so that's one of the, we have different events at different times on different days. And we've actually experimented with that over time. With our Skeptics in the Pub especially, we moved actually to a Tuesday night for a while to see, because Fridays we were having trouble getting into venues. Well, then people stopped coming, so we went back to Fridays. So people really did want that to be like on an end of the week evening thing. So one of the suggestions I would say to people, if you're having trouble with falling attendance, is experiment a little bit and tell people you're experimenting, and then tell them to tell you what they think, because if you don't ask them, you won't know why that person didn't come to that different time or day, because they need to have that outlet in order to give you the feedback. So that's one thing we're working on here as well.
Yeah, and I think you've done a great job with member surveys too, because if you just ask the people who show up for those meetings, they're going to tell you they love that meeting time.
Right.
If you need to ask the people who aren't showing up, what is lacking or what it's missing that would get them to come? Is it a different day, different kind of meeting, anything else like that, different location? So that's a good one. I wanted to mention one other thing before we get to our new join, which is lifting up service projects, service work. All of my experience over years suggests like we would have 80%, 85, 90% men at meetings 10, 15 years ago for discussion meetings and sometimes lectures too. And sometimes we'd see women show up but then leave because they couldn't get a word in. When the Philadelphia Coalition of Reason started and focused on service projects about 10, 12 years ago now, all of a sudden it was 70, 80% women in attendance. And they're like, where did these women just come from? Why don't they go to our egg-headed discussion groups on Friday nights, where everyone yells at each other? What a shock. This is mysterious to us. So yeah, definitely doing different things, attracting different demographics, and some groups might be slow to change that because of who's in leadership and who has time, frankly. But yeah,
the same problem.
Having said that, though, we have been joined by Debbie Williams. So glad to have you. Would you like to introduce yourself, talk somewhat about your background, your involvement, how long you've been involved, what your group is, and then we'll go from there.
Okay, hi, my name's Debbie Williams. I am the most recent former president of Humanists of Houston, which is a really large chapter of the American Humanist Association located in Houston, Texas. Before that, I was a board member for 2 years. So 3 years I was in leadership. The secular movement, I was brought in by the Reason Rally, and that there was a movement and stuff. And I moved to Houston from up north, and it was needed to find to. And I found Humanists of Houston, and we were off. I'm currently moving from Houston. I'm in a hotel room in Boise, Idaho at the moment. But I have I'm really looking forward to where the movement's going to go next.
Cool. So were you in Houston at the time of the Reason Rally?
No, I was not. And I almost think that even more than the Reason Rally in Houston, in 2011, there was a conference where Richard Dawkins and Christopher Hitchens, who was undergoing cancer treatment at MD Anderson, kind of said their public farewells to one another. And that was absolutely instrumental in getting the secular movement in Houston going. It was, so Reason Rally brought me in. I wasn't living in Houston at that time, but that conference in 2011 completely revitalized, motivated, and created the secular movement in Houston in many ways.
Yeah, that was like the Texas Free Thought Convention, right?
Yes.
Something like that, 700 attendees. I wasn't there, but that got a lot of kudos from people, that it was an amazing event.
Yes.
So we were about to talk about more recent things, but before that, Debbie, since you came in late, would you like to talk about what your groups look like since you've gotten involved?
Well, when I first joined Humanists of Houston, it was the intellectual salon model, and a bunch of men sitting around talking in very abstract notions about what humanism looks like. And it was really more of just an atheist group as opposed to a humanist group. And then Benita Malone and I got involved. More women got involved in leadership, and we were doing service projects like packing food, reaching out to the homeless communities, organizing giveaways for people. And we were attracting a whole different crowd. So as we started living our humanism, the group started to change and get rid of some of the talking.
I mentioned that of all the groups I joined when I first got involved 18 years ago, the one that I didn't stick with locally was a humanist group, because it met on Sunday mornings. It was a mature crowd. It was elderly crowd. It wasn't even, it wasn't 50s, 60s mature. I was 20, 21 at the time. It was like 70s, 80s plus mature. And I found it boring. I didn't want to go. And they changed a lot after they put younger people in leadership, and that included a woman in her 20s and a man, I think, in his late 40s. I'm not sure. but that was the Humanist Association of Greater Philadelphia, and they started having movie nights, and they started having drinking events, and they started having dinners, and then it was hopping, and I plugged back in. So several of you have mentioned like changes, diversifying or changing leadership to have different people's perspectives represented about what the group should be and what the interests should be, and also who have the interests in expanding into something past the intellectual salon model. Certainly that's something I've seen in 18 years is, the leaders I saw and still see, and this is no knock against them, but a lot of retired professors, retired people who had different interests in different fields, but it was, older men generally who really liked that intellectual salon model and saw that as the purpose for what we do. And that started shifting around 2004, 2005 for the groups that I saw, that more younger people got involved, and that includes in their 40s and 50s younger, and shifted who the groups reached out to and what they did.
We did a lot of things, not just going out and helping people, but also we created a navigators group, which is a scouting, co-ed, non-discriminatory scouting group to bring in younger secular families and stuff like that. And it's been kind of a disruption to some of our older members who are used to meetings being these nice, quiet, they can yell at each other, but if someone brings their, 6-year-old kid and he's playing around in the back, so it's interesting trying to balance that need. But you're right. And I was one of the younger people, and I was in my mid 40s. And then we had gathered people to go see movies, like you said. And then we started seeing different people show up, and consistently, instead of going to a talking event where people were yelling at each other, like you said, it was just a much more event that they could all embrace.
So we've been talking around some recent changes to our groups related to the election of Donald Trump. One of the big changes to how groups work seemed to be social media. A lot of people said, as soon as Facebook became a thing, their groups started looking different. As soon as Meetup became a thing and people didn't have to literally like go to your website or find a flyer, maybe our groups started looking different. With the growth of New Atheism and then the Reason Rally that plugged a lot of people into the movement, showed them that there was one, showed them that there were local groups and how exciting things were, a lot of people got involved in our groups. That changed the way that our grassroots looked. More recently, we've had the 2016 election and subsequent weird world that we live in now, where nothing seems to make sense. Big changes to our cultural and political landscape. So how might that have affected the way your groups look? Maybe what they do, who joins, who's left, what your focus has been. Let's talk about that for a bit. And whoever wants to go first can, or I'll pick one of your heads.
Actually, let me talk a little bit about one of the things that I've noticed most, and I don't know that this is actually entirely members' fault, but we've had a greater number of disruptions in our meetings. We've had proselytizers show up to a very obviously atheist discussion group. Yep. We've had to throw members out for being horribly disrespectful to our speaker and dominating time and arguing and calling everybody idiots. So it's just been, and it's like it's been one after another, like I'm being tested or something. I'm taking it all very personally. But yeah, we've definitely seen, and maybe it's just because people are so frustrated and feel impotent to make change or something, but I definitely feel that frustration in our groups, a year later.
Quick follow-up question to you, Monette. Did that start with Trump being elected? Because in my experience, that started with like Bernie versus Hillary time. I started seeing more people that were highly, I don't want to even say engaged, enraged at higher energy levels, emotion levels regarding Bernie versus Hillary, and carrying that into their secular movement participation as well.
Yeah, well, I mean, you kind of always have that sort of argument, I mean, you know, because we always have libertarians coming in and arguing with everybody about everything. But the rage, probably you're right with the rage starting with Hillary versus Bernie and just amping up ever since then, because nobody's been able to like be cathartic about it or anything. There's no culmination of any kind of outcome. They're still just all very angry.
I'd say one of the changes that we've seen since the election specifically is, at first I was expecting kind of an influx of more people, particularly after some of the initial attacks that seemed very much geared towards, well, you guys are all familiar with this because you're all tied in, but the whole thing of like, religious people are being persecuted, we need to protect ourselves, which really actually meant we just want to persecute other people. And so I would see all of my members on Facebook talking about these issues and expecting them to feel like they would need to show up at an event. That did not happen. What I did see happen was a lot of people saying, I've been sitting around doing nothing for a long time. I need to do something. I need to do more. And for many of those people, I thought this was really cool. A lot of my core board members and volunteers actually went out and said, I'm now donating to CFI and ACLU, and would like list all of these groups on their page and say, you need to go do the same thing. And so we did see a little bit of a bump there, but that wasn't sustained, unfortunately. But yeah, the first like 4 to 8 months, I really got a ton of, I need to get involved and do something. So we had a lot of more people saying that they wanted to volunteer. Some people did follow through, some people didn't. But we did see a lot more interest in advocacy type things, at least people saying that they wanted to. I think partially for us is other groups like ACLU, Planned Parenthood, Progressive Women's Alliance, different things that we have here, they were already set up to do more activism and to react faster. And so I think we lost an opportunity there where a lot of those people would have done stuff with us, but we didn't have a system built already to grab these people and to push them into start doing something about the specific legislation or a specific statement that Trump had made or different people in the administration had made. And so I was, trying to keep up with that and trying to provide that level of engagement, but I was kind of lagging behind the leaders of the pack in that. And so I think some of our people, just did a shift. They still needed to get involved and do something right now. So they went with the ACLU and the other groups that were already ready to go on that front, which is fine because there's a lot of those issues as a nonprofit, CFI can't actually do anything with. So that was interesting to see. Now that it's been a year and people are getting, are still depressed and are still like seeing the onslaught not stop, I have seen people start to kind of come back and say, okay, we really need to do more to protect like secular values. And they see a lot of the religious attacks continuing, especially the HHS stuff that's been coming out, basically the right to discriminate and a lot of the other things. I've seen people saying, yeah, we need to do this. So I think like a second window kind of coming up that we might be able to take advantage of as a secular movement to specifically hit those issues where we can say this is directly related to our mission and it's not a partisan thing, because I felt really sensitive to that, knowing as a nonprofit, we can't be saying because Trump did this, that's really close to saying Republican versus Democrat. And I know we have to be careful with that as far as legal standing.
Anyone can jump in. I don't want to have to call on you if you're ready to go.
We actually had a very dramatic thing happen the weekend before the election. One of our board members resigned by wearing a Trump Pence t-shirt. So yeah, that was awkward. So we had the group for the most part leaned left liberal, and but there were a couple of libertarians and others who actually got along well with the group. It wasn't as contentious as that can be in some scenarios. But after, when some things kind of led up to that, like involvement in Black Lives Matter organizations locally, that caused some tensions. But one of the things that really helped us through this was our bylaws, that as a humanist organization, one of our purpose statements included things specifically about social justice activism, and the AHA's leaning toward, making public statements about moving toward the social justice focus were helpful in that regard. But we also, in our purpose statement, had something about being a community of non-believers and making sure that we were welcoming to everyone of non-belief. So the board kind of discussed how we would deal with political differences. And the idea was that we should be unabashed about our social justice focus, our public face, our event, or support activities. But our social events would be as welcoming as possible so people could feel personally welcome. And I think that's been a very good guideline for us to take since the Trump years. And since then also, maybe this is for later part of the conversation, is that I've noticed a little bit of burnout, that in a way we're kind of all arguing online, and we want to, that we don't want to be fighting those battles 24/7.
I would like to kind of disagree. We have a libertarian problem. We're in Texas. I mean, it was an interesting thing after Trump. We had one member who went on this rant about how the 19th Amendment, which is the one that allowed women to vote, allowed white women to vote, basically has destroyed the American family. And he wanted to have an intellectual debate about whether or not women should be allowed to vote, because look what happened with Hillary and stuff like that. And the salon people are going, yeah, let's discuss that. But we're a humanist group, and we don't debate the basic humanity of other people. And we also had a libertarian who wanted to, it actually did have an objectivism versus humanism presentation and why objectivism was better. And we saw a huge ramp up of that post-Trump. And when I said no, as the president, no, we're not going to debate whether or not women are equal. This is a settled thing. That basically he got in my face, did one of these and said, I'm the vote you need to succeed, so you should be good to me, kind of stuff. And what I have discovered is that when we create space for the libertarians, we push out the people who are actually new to humanism. And they come into a meeting and they see people quoting Glenn Beck and his views on Islam, then as opposed to someone who actually knows something about Islam or something like that. I discovered pretty early on in the Trump years, oh, I hate saying that, Trump years, that we had to set these boundaries early and often. And it was very difficult because the intellectual salon people wanted to have this debate. And I don't think debating whether or not women should be allowed to vote is a humanist value. And so I think it's different when it's an atheist group. And there is a very vibrant atheist group in Houston that the non-believers can go to, and there's lots of social stuff. But in this space, in the humanist space, we do humanist values. And if you want to promote non-humanist values, there's the door. But it just kind of, we had to set that boundary. And it just seemed like someone else mentioned that the proselytizers were showing up and stuff. Like, these people were coming out of the woodwork even right after the election. It was like they all said, oh, this is awesome. I get to do this. Look, the guy I agreed with got elected, so I can come into this space and promote these things. You're in Houston. There's plenty of other options for you to go talk that stuff, and you're not going to do it here. And I had women who were not specifically women, specifically people of color, who didn't want to get into these fights with old white men who were talking about how they needed to carry their guns. The guy who said that women shouldn't be allowed to vote is a huge proponent of carrying his gun everywhere. And it was interesting to have them say, we're scared now, and I'm glad you set this boundary. I think it might be different in other places than Houston, Texas, regarding having to set that boundary. I'm not saying everybody has to, but we found we had to.
One of the things that oh, go ahead, Steph.
I was just going to say, I'm really glad that I feel very fortunate that I haven't had to deal with any members like that, and I really don't have like a lot to add to the subject other than like we didn't really have any like members kind of turn or try and
Turn.
things, and I wonder if some of that is because like CFI like is an international organization, made it very clear like we do not stand for Trump and his values, and so I wonder if some of that was sort of communicated to our local members. But even our local members, who I wouldn't necessarily say are the most progressive, or still don't like Trump, and so in some way Trump has been sort of an easy topic of conversation when maybe there'd be something else that would be controversial or cause sort of a rift within the organization. Like, I've definitely seen members be able to just hash it out at potlucks and discussion groups. Just, it's sort of cathartic, just talking about Trump with people who they know are, generally reasonable people, believe conspiracy theories and things like that. And people are more interested in talking about like fake news, and more interested in like attending marches and things like that are sort of like a direct rebuke to Trump. But other than that, that's sort of been the main thing that's happened with us.
So one comment on that I wanted to hit on is we did see some of that. Being in a more conservative area in West Michigan, we did see a little bit more of that, because we do have a very strong libertarian streak around here. And we also call Grand Rapids the donut, because Grand Rapids proper is Democratic leaning as far as election and votes go usually, but surrounding us for about 30 miles in every direction is complete what we would call Republican stronghold. And so if you're talking to your friends who actually live in the city, you're pretty safe pretty much saying whatever you want against Trump. But if you happen to go to the Skeptics in the Pub in Holland, you do need to be careful, because the people at the table next to you might invite themselves over to start yelling at you.
Yeah.
So, and to Monette's problem, I know that I'm very happy to say, like Stef did, that we didn't have that specific issue of having to actually kick people out. But one of the things that we have done at CFI Michigan since the very beginning, and I think this might actually be a result of the fact that we were part of a very conservative area, that we made a very specific effort to create a positive tone and environment. And we would even say this at lectures, that when we knew we were bringing in the topic that everybody was going to be really emotional about and get really upset about, at the beginning of the lecture, we'd almost give a disclaimer of like, we are providing a forum for people to discuss things from a rational and evidence-based perspective, and you must be respectful, otherwise we're going to ask you to leave. We've only ever had to enforce that 3 times in 20 years, because when you make that expectation clear up front, people self-moderate. Right? We actually, the worst one, I was actually never even there, but the worst situation we had was a circumcision versus no circumcision event. A lady who was a nurse was talking about how she has to do this for her job, but she actually personally believes that it shouldn't be really pushed down parents' throats to do this particular procedure. And there was a no cert guy in the audience that like beeline to this lady afterwards to try and like start yelling at her. And our leadership never even got there, because members took it upon themselves to escort that gentleman from the building and protect that lady from having to talk to him at all. So that's one of those things where it seems like something you don't feel like you should have to do. And I know we've talked about this amongst the branch leaders sometimes in the past, is the expectations, the culture and expectations and things like that. So what we've done at our events is we put together this document that says, here are our culture and expectations, and if you're not going to follow these, we're going to ask you to leave. And at the bottom, we link to CFI's full policy on hostile conduct and harassment. And I think that has been really helpful, because people know up front whether or not they are doing a thing that they're supposed to do. And I also think that it also empowers the other members to feel like they can speak up when something happens that they feel is not conducive to helping the conversation continue. So that's one thing that I've been really proud of that we have done. And yeah, we've had some problems with some of the discussion groups where the libertarians and the really, liberal Democrats go at it with each other, but we ask them to please keep it civil, and if not, they can continue discussion after the event.
I would think. I want to return to, I think it was Michael that mentioned this idea Michael mentioned about burnout in social media for a second, and maybe connected to libertarians. Maybe. There's so much to say there. I know I and others, but I'll speak from personal experience and as a person who is involved in these groups in meetings and things. I've had way less patience over time, but particularly recently, for intellectualizing debates about things that relate to policy and my life. And so when Sam Harris interviews Charles Murray about race and IQ, and someone at a CFI event wants to talk to me for some interesting reason about that, I'll be like, I work here, so I have to be nice to you right now, but like, I don't, I don't, there's only so much I want to talk about Sam Harris and how interesting these ideas are. So yeah, that if I just lived in Buffalo and there was this group locally or in other places, and these debates came up as, interesting intellectual exercises, I would really not be interested in that. I think my time could be better spent engaged in things that are connected to activism and change. And I have seen others who reflected that, including students who graduate who may have had a more activist student group. They look at their local group, they're like, they're just talking about this stuff, but like, I'm going to go get involved in racial justice work, or I'm going to go get involved in LGBTQ equality stuff, or, whatever it might be, part of the resistance. I think that not all of the people that argue with me are libertarians, but a good number of them are more libertarian leaning. And I haven't been in a local group leadership position directly in a long time, and I haven't had to, therefore, make a policy that works for my area. I work with group leaders who make policies for their own areas. I wonder, what do you do about your Republicans and libertarians? You set expectations, as Jen said. You kick them out if they're too disruptive. You remove them from the meetings. You say, these topics aren't what this group is for, and it's actually harmful to the nature of our group, as Debbie said. Talk more about that, because that's definitely a split. And have you seen alt-right people showing up for your group meetings or participating online? I open the floor.
Yeah. Well, I live in Texas, so yes, there's all of that. What my superpower seems to be is making right-wing white men uncomfortable. And after I had this run-in with the guy who wanted to debate women's basic humanity, and I was approached by some of the older men saying, that confrontation made me feel uncomfortable. And I said, good, why didn't you participate? That was sort of it. And what I've setting expectations was, and empowering our membership to stand up when this happens. And we had some alt-right, I'm not going to say alt-right, I'm just going to call them Nazis. If you have swastikas on your Facebook page, you're a Nazi. And they would post stuff within our Facebook group. They would join the Facebook group. We're not super tight about who we let in. And we just had to be super fast about removing them. And we would let them know, but we wouldn't necessarily delete the post. We'd say, this is not in line with our code of conduct. We don't hold these values. And I think empowering your membership to basically tell those people to go pound sand is very important, because the leadership can't be everywhere, but also it's making them uncomfortable. And I'm really good at that. So it's about being confrontational, but in a bless your heart sort of way. And it's not like I have the physical, I'm 5'1", I'm small. I can't go up to the 6'2" guy who likes to carry his open carry gun. What I can do is go get the security guard at the community center to come handle it for me. It's stuff like that. Boy, the look on your face, Debbie, it makes it sound like
guns. What?
yes.
Yeah,
And so,
that's a lot.
that's Texas. So it's been eye-opening as to how many of the people that I thought were my community really weren't. When it came down to it, they may not believe in God, but that their values aren't humanist values. And so it's about, we've kicked out a few, but mostly it's about making it uncomfortable for the people to even want to come to a meeting because they can't carry their gun. They can't stash it in the bathroom. That actually happened in the public bathroom. The guy left his gun in the public bathroom because he didn't want to bring it into the meeting. It's it's been an interesting year.
This is all in 1 year, she says.
Yes, yes. That was 2017.
We have a lot of our core members who are the every idea deserves to be discussed. So when people do want to come and talk about, well, women are inferior, I'm shutting them down,
right?
Because it's my meeting. And everyone else is being all, oh no, free discussion and everything. So it gets to be difficult when your base still wants to discuss about how, the progressive kids on campus are ruining education and therefore the world. It's a challenge, but at least we don't have guns. I guess that's going to be my bar now.
Right.
And
Yeah.
Ohio is an open carry state, but
Right.
as far as I know, nobody's bringing their guns to our meetings because I would definitely have to draw a line there.
I'm sorry that you had to lower your bar now.
I'm pretty lucky because I have a good advisory board backing me up, and it really helps when, I don't attend most of CFI Western New York's discussion meetings. I don't have time. A volunteer runs that, and I make sure that the volunteer who's in charge of running that is a person who I trust to moderate the discussion. You really can't, a good moderator is just really worth, you want to make sure that person's there, because we've had some bad moderators in the past who have let comments go that someone really should have said something, and then we learned later that someone didn't return because they felt uncomfortable and no one said anything. Something that our advisory board came up with recently is a 1-page list of discussion guidelines, and they just bring a few copies of that to every discussion meeting. And it's not that we had any serious issues before. There was sort of one particular member who was making discussions not super enjoyable. But apparently it's just been really useful for everyone because it's made not only people sort of rethink if they're going to say something that's not going to be productive, but also just let people reflect on why we're having these discussions and how to improve the quality of discussions and what a respectful way to disagree is, and how to, instead of calling people out, how to maybe point people more in the right direction if they say something misguided about race or gender, and that they kind of mean well, but maybe we should talk a little bit about why that was a problem. So that's sort of, I would say, a moderator and having a list of discussion guidelines has been really useful to making sure that our group isn't overrun with libertarian or alt-right people who want to talk over everyone.
That's a really good point, Stef, because one of the things that I often have to remind myself of now is I have been a group leader for almost 2 decades now, which is really weird to say, but at the same time, I forget that other people don't know how to moderate discussions. Yeah. I forget that attendees don't know how to moderate discussions. They don't. We train ourselves to stand up and, hopefully the person doesn't have a gun, like Debbie was saying, but I will walk up to the guy, the 6-foot guy, and tell him he's out of line and he can either behave himself or he may leave. Because in my group, I know I have 40 other people behind me that are totally going to back me up. But if your group members don't feel like that, if your moderator doesn't feel like that, then yeah, that would make a huge difference. So that's why I'm actually really excited. Steph, you were just saying about your guidelines. I was just going to message you and say, hey, send me that, because I never finished developing mine because I got busy and I got a couple of good people in there. But you know, what happens when Dennis has to quit hosting that event? And I now have a new person that doesn't know what they're doing. So I'm really excited about the project that Sarah Levin is working on. And I think she's talking about that. I think it was that yesterday or this afternoon.
It was yesterday morning.
Yesterday, okay. About getting all of these resources so that we're not reinventing the wheel and kind of getting a central clearinghouse for this stuff. And I was geeking out with her on the phone for about 2 hours one day. So, because that's right up my alley. And I'm just thrilled because that's exactly what we need, is to share the expertise that we have. Because as the whole point of this panel is, things change, but everything's going to keep changing. And if we all work together so that we're able to adapt more quickly and more effectively, we're all going to be better off. So,
Yes.
And I think our members really appreciate it too, empowering them to know what's in bounds, what's out of bounds. That's what we need to be better at as a society in general, right? Is having conversations about difficult issues without threatening each other or, insulting each other personally, and sticking to the arguments and not attacking the individual. And I've had members actually specifically recently ask for that, like an event on how to do that. And that's really telling to me, where I haven't seen that before. And I've seen more people asking about critical thinking seminars and things where they want to know how do you spot fake news? How do we spot media bias? How do we do these things so that we can be good secular humanists who say that we rely on evidence and actually do that? So yeah, we've got our work cut out for us, but I think that there's definitely a need there.
I want to bounce off of that, but I feel that I at first am compelled to say hashtag not all libertarians.
Yes,
In my professional capacity, I definitely am saying that. But some of the issues that Jen, like you just mentioned, and others have mentioned, do seem, I think we all as organizers would feel comfortable saying, do seem to be associated more closely with libertarians or people who identify as classical liberals. I don't see a lot of self-identified Republicans, so I don't want to speak about that, but I assume there likely is a connection. More people who are less interested in following guidelines for seeing groups work well necessarily. They might speak out more because of some ideas about personal freedom. Let's say that. But bouncing off of that and looking to the trends we've seen and the way that we think things are going to be looking for the future. I was curious when Trump was elected, whether we would see in the next 3 to 5 years a growth of people who identified more strongly as atheists, actually, rather than humanists, rather than, wishy-washy secular, no identity, I don't like labels type, because there would be more attacks on church-state separation, because there would be a more theocratic government, more threats from the connection between church and state, especially Christianity, and that would drive people, therefore, to feel more oppressed as non-religious people, and therefore to be more likely to take on this active identity of atheist. That still might be the case. We'll wait 3 to 5 years and see if that's the case. But meanwhile, we've seen, everyone's mentioned that more people in our groups seem to be interested in work, in the activism, in the rallies, in the marches, in the how-tos. What do I do about this? How do I do it effectively? And at the group leadership level, there's been, I know all of our groups are sort of connected to humanist values. Either we have humanist in the name of our group, or for Center for Inquiry, humanist values as part of our mission. So we're not just atheist groups. But certainly the humanist groups have a commitment to social justice, and there might be more interest in people using that label because it is connected to action beyond non-belief in God. So I wonder, have you seen a more atheist identity in the wake of Trump, or can you talk more about if people are grabbing the label of humanist more closely, identifying more as humanists, interested more in, as the ethical culture people say, deed and not creed? And what do you think that's going to look like going forward? Michael, how about you?
I was just about to unmute.
Okay. Saw it in your eyes.
Well, it's funny because I'm probably just thinking about our board members that we have a current vice president and a previous vice president who seem actively uninterested in what labels we use and more in doing actual activism, going out and the VP just set up a visitation with a local retirement community and not necessarily wearing the shirts or anything, just going and doing it. And I love that in a lot of ways, that we're doing this because it's a good thing to do and we have the resources to do it, rather than kind of broadcasting our non-belief. I'm wondering if that's going to catch hold, because like I said, as we started, we were kind of a Four Horsemen fan club. Now I see a lot more energy toward doing this kind of thing. Another thing, I should mention too, is some people have expressed, a lot of us have PhDs in the atheist movement. We know who everybody is. We know what the latest arguments are. And some people in the group have expressed active disinterest in that. We don't need to be talking about it. We just need to be doing. And I find that an inspiring perspective, though we also do need to know, are there problems or dangers in the movement that need to be openly discussed? But I'm grateful to see a lot of focus on just locally getting out there.
In Houston, Benita Malone was the vice president while I was president. We really worked closely together. But we started doing more marches. We did the March for Science, and that went well. And we got new people, again, a different demographic than our intellectual salon people. But then we also partnered with our local BLM group about a Confederate statues march. And that pushed our people a little bit out of their comfort zone, our older people, but it brought more people to the group that identified as non-believers. They couldn't say the A word. So I think that is a progression that most people have gone through who do become part of the atheist movement. And so when Hurricane Harvey happened, we already had these relationships with BLM and other community-based organizations, so that when we started doing work post-Harvey, and remember, 3 of the board members were flooded and evacuated, myself included. But within a week and a half, we were mucking out houses and dropping off Walmart gift cards, because we could turn to BLM and say, you're working with West Street Recovery, what do they need? And instead of going in as saviors and saying, we're going to fix it all, we said, what do you need? They needed gift cards to buy basics, and they needed people. So we had people coming out of the woodwork on our meetup group and mucking houses and stuff like that. So that was probably the most beautiful thing post-Trump, because if we hadn't built those relationships, we wouldn't have had them at that time for Hurricane Harvey. And our salon people, they were happy if I just gave them a documentary at the monthly meeting, and then we would go do the work in the afternoon. And then it would be a completely different group. But it has grown, and I don't know where it's going to be in 3 years, but it's going to look more like Houston, which is not as white as our meetings. It's not as old, and I'm really excited about that we're able to provide this space where we live these values. It isn't just packing food at the Houston Food Bank. And Benita Malone, who was the vice president, was absolutely instrumental in making those relationships happen. And I think post-Trump, these humanist groups, that's a great way to do it.
I think to what Stef said earlier about the switch with younger people specifically, moving away from let's sit and have a debate on a topic versus let's go do something. I remember the leadership conference where there was a discussion that happened, and all of the adult leaders were in the room with the student group thing, like a combined session, and then we went out, and there was almost like some of the older leaders, especially, like I was kind of in the middle, like Monette and I remember Monette and I and Stef and Debbie were all kind of in like the middle range, and then there was a group of older leaders and then the student leaders, and the older ones were like, did they say they don't even care what label they pick? I'm confused. Why are we, what? And it kind of like threw us off for a minute. We're like, actually, that's not a bad thing, but now we have to change our tactic, because we were trying to explain to the student leaders that they should like organize debates and panel discussions and stuff like that. And they're like, yeah, no, we're just going to go do service projects. And we're like, with the interfaith group, with the Christian group, with the Catholic group from campus, and it's great, and we all get along, and we go out to pizza afterwards, and it's like, oh, okay, well that works too, I guess. So it was just, but it was kind of definitely like there's a major shift with the younger groups younger people that I think we need to look at and adapt for our groups, because if we really do want to engage that younger generation, that's what we're going to have to be doing, because I've had conversations with friends of mine that I've found that they've known about CFI for years, and I've met them through like another acquaintance, and I say what I do, and they're like, oh yeah, I know about your group. And I'm like, I've never seen you. And they're like, yeah, I don't go to those things, because it's completely irrelevant to them to discuss a specific title or whatever they want to call themselves. They're more into doing the political and the social activism. And I think we need to prepare and adapt for that, because the statistics are showing that there's so many of these younger people that don't have religion, but they don't want to be involved in the opposite. They just don't want to be involved in that at all. And there's so many other things that we can do. So that's going to be something that our secular organizations really need to adapt to, which is also why I'm really happy to see a lot more of the stuff with, I've been working with Secular Coalition for America and the local groups here, and trying to kind of cross those group boundaries, and let's all work together about stuff, instead of, the atheist group is in their silo, the humanist group is in their silo, and then we're over here, and kind of crossing those boundaries. So there's, I think, a lot of opportunities there, but it's going to require some shifting of mindsets, and also tactics of like what types of events we're choosing to do.
Yeah, I completely agree with that, Jen. I don't know if it was Michael or someone who said earlier, like, there's people in our groups who are, maybe they're still part of the group, but they're getting involved in racial justice work outside of the group, or maybe they're just choosing to focus more on that. And I don't know, part of me is kind of excited for the potential future of the secular movement, and part of me is really afraid, because I think if we don't sort of capture, I don't know what to call it, sort of like the cultural moment that we're in right now, like young people are going to leave. They're going to be like, I mean, particularly if they live in like a city or a more liberal area, I have to say, they're going to be like, I can do racial justice work. I can do, like fighting for abortion access, things like that. I don't need to do that under an atheist banner. And these people identify with my values way more than the old people sitting in a room in this intellectual salon model of community group organizing. So I think if we don't make our groups relevant to what's going on right now, people my age and younger are going to leave. And I think a lot of them have already left, because they're just like, there's really nothing for me here. I don't feel like we're creating the change in the world that we think we're creating. And so I think, groups really need to get on that. I completely agree with Jen.
The opening remarks for this conference were by Greta Christina, talking about how we can remain relevant in this time of resistance and change and everything. And Debbie, you and Greta did a workshop at Skepticon with that same topic, didn't you?
Yep.
Yeah. So I think I missed your workshop, unfortunately, which I really, really wanted to hit.
It had all the answers.
You got all the answers?
Yeah.
Awesome.
No, I'm kidding. It didn't. It was more discussion and like giving everyone participated. It was called Making Ourselves Relevant in the Resistance. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no. It's just, I think that is a big topic right now that we should all be kind of focusing on, because more people are able to call themselves secular humanists or atheists or agnostic or whatever they want to say. Our groups aren't going to be as important to them, because that part of their identity isn't going to be as important to them. So being an organization of doers as opposed to, what are you? Well, we're the ones who discuss how bad religion is. That's just going to be irrelevant here in a while, I think. At least, trends show that. So, yeah, that was all.
I agree. So humanist groups living and demonstrating their values rather than focusing on just attracting atheists or non-religious people. Like, they're not groups for atheists as much as groups that do humanist work more. Did that sentence come out right? I'm not sure. But people were talking about living these values, showing the work, doing the rallies, thinking of the impact that we can have in our communities, and not just being discussion groups for non-religious people. Jen, you mentioned the CFI Leadership Conference and seeing students who really didn't care so much about the labels. I gotta say, having worked with student groups now for a long time, it's weird now because there are students who are younger than when I started working in this movement, and it freaks me out sometimes. But seeing them being involved with students in some way for a while, I can tell you, like, it's kind of cutting edge, leading edge of changes for our movement. It's not necessarily the case that what happens with the 18 to 24-year-olds percolates through the rest of the movement, but it often clarifies what's happening for at least a good chunk of people who are involved, and it moves very quickly. What is the case now might not be the case 2 years from now, right? Because the turnover is so high. But we saw at a leadership conference, and as Jen said, we were discussing it as it was happening, just how interfaithy the students were. When we did the reports from the field at the beginning of the conference, everyone was reporting like, we want to figure out interfaith, and we want to build understanding, and we want to have platforms for people to talk to each other, not debate about what they believe, but the values that we share and their backgrounds, and we can share our backgrounds and how we reach the place we are. And some of us were kind of hanging around and being just like, when did the students get so squishy? Like, they're real squishy right now. Like, can we motivate them to be activisty too, and to engage in advocacy? And we recognize, like, the platform to do that was not like, you're an atheist and the bad guys are religion and we have to fight them. Like, that was not the language that would resonate or work. It wasn't the model we were coming from, but it might have been how we framed it in a way to motivate people to take action before. And we recognize we have had to move away from that. That language might have worked better in like 2000, 2001, and does not resonate for a lot of people now. They're on the interfaith train to, happy work togetherville.
Right. Well, and I think it works better to connect with people outside of our movement also. I think that the kids are on the right track, honestly. Like, what is it? The from the mouths of children, right? If you're sitting there insisting on arguing about whether or not you're an atheist or humanist, and you have somebody who's maybe questioning their religion or is more liberal Christian, and they decide to come to one of your events, they're really not going to be interested in the minutia of our philosophical discussions of how we're defining labels. If we really want to connect with other people in the broader community, the interfaith, the social justice, the service work, the advocacy, those are the things where we are able to build those bridges. And we've had some luck with that locally with our work with the interfaith group here in West Michigan. And so I think it is one of those kind of models for the future pluralistic society trends is to, be adaptive, to be able to take those opportunities when they come to do the interfaith coalition on the social justice issue. But I think it is also important that we still have, our principles and people understand like what it means, what secular humanism means, what atheism means. But yeah, the shift to the more collaborative versus argumentative thing, I definitely see that as a younger thing. And also that's more welcoming to a lot of women. Women don't want to sit there and watch old guys yell at each other all night. Honestly, that's why our service program started, is because those ladies didn't want to sit in lectures and hear these other guys argue about minutia of philosophy. They wanted to go out and do something. And so that's definitely a huge trend.
Yeah, we definitely can't be allergic to interfaith work, especially potential allies like Unitarian Universalist congregations. I'm a member of one here, and they have infrastructure, they have a building, they have money, they have people and ways to organize. And so any work with, say, local Black Lives Matter organizations, they have the infrastructure to help work alongside. We're just a small group. We can't just come in and say, all right, we're the South Jersey Humanists, we're here to help. Sometimes working together with large organizations for a small group like us is a way of kind of getting out there and doing the right thing, and also building your humanist principles and living them. So you might not always be wearing the t-shirt, but sometimes you can be and be vocal about what this is part of humanism, and other people can see that and join up, and you can bring in people that way.
I see Stephanie. So how much time do we have? Is this closing final thoughts about trends time?
Yeah, we're coming up on about 4 minutes to the end of your time. 4
minutes. All right. Any final thoughts, big overviews? What's the future look like? What up? Do you feel good about things that you want to share? Can I make that question broader? What do you think? I have a think. I'll say my think, and anyone can chime in, or we'll use it as a closing statement if you don't have a thing. So we didn't address all of these things we could address, and one thing that I thought we might have the chance to drill into more was the interesting relationship between what we see on social media in our movement and community and what we see on the ground. When we talk about student groups, it's not to say that all young non-believers are definitely committed to social justice and humanism and interfaith. In fact, we know that a lot of young atheists are more closely affiliated with the alt-right, even libertarianism, a more new atheist perspective, things like that. In my experience, we don't tend to see them join groups as much. And if they happen, if people who represent those perspectives do tend to get in group leadership positions, their groups die. Their groups don't last. And so, when we talk about successful groups and building groups, we're talking about what we've seen that works and what doesn't work, and what we think we have to keep in mind for building towards the future. And a lot of that seems to be humanist values, focusing on doing cooperative relationships, collaboration. So I'm not sad that we didn't spend too much time in that other realm, because we're reflecting who we see is involved in what we know works on the ground, which is, I think, a good summary for the general trends we've seen at the grassroots level in our movement. Michael, did you have something to say? Oh, no?
No.
Anyone else want to add to that for a minute? All right, no? Well, thank you all for participating. Thanks to viewers out there watching and future viewers too. This was a really productive and interesting conversation, and I know it gave me some things to think about, and I'll be following up with some of you to flesh out some of the questions I have remaining. But thank you all. Happy Sunday. I hope it's not snowing where you are. Thank you very much, Stephanie, for organizing this too.
Thank you, Debbie. Thank you, Stephanie.
All right, and for those of you who are watching OrbitCon and you want to see more content, go to the-orbit.net. Right at the top of the page, you will find that banner ad for OrbitCon that will take you to the schedule. We actually have another session that has already started, our one overlap for the season, but get out there and see more. And thank you to everybody. This has been a stimulating and occasionally terrifying discussion.
I'm sorry.
The guns!